Thank you for joining the Judaism Demystified podcast. Dr. Brown, thank you. First, I'd like to know, and I'd like the audience to know a little bit about yourself, your background, your methodology in studying Tanakh and teaching, as well as your affiliation with Rabbi Sacks.
Well, those are a lot. I don't know how much time you have. First of all, thank you for having me on the show. I came on the show because I want Judaism to be demystified. So you've set up a lot of expectations for me personally.
Nice.
And it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. I'm actually taping this from my home in Silver Spring, Maryland. Where I've lived for the past 20 years. We raised our family of 4, now family of 8 since my children got married, and we have 5 beautiful grandchildren. So that's the most important thing to me, and that's really the center of my life. Everything else is commentary, as Whitehead said. In terms of the work, let's go to Rabbi Sacks first. I married an Englishman. So I left the colonies for a little while, for a few years. And those were years when Rabbi Sacks, who was not known to me when I was a student at Yeshiva University as an undergraduate, Rabbi Sacks was the principal of Jews College, which was a small. It was created in the late 19th century to be a rabbinic training grounds for rabbis, and has expanded to offer degrees in Jewish studies. And so I was a student. I taught there, and I was also a student at Rabbi Sacks's, and it was a relatively small place. So I felt that I was able to study a number of courses with him. I taught in his shul at the time. He was a rabbi in Marble Arch, and my husband and I would go regularly, and I would teach, and I ran the Sixth Form Center, which was basically for juniors and seniors in high school who were going to what we would call prep schools, and they in America, and they wanted to have a strong Jewish education. And so on Sunday we would do that, and Rabbi Sacks often came in to speak. So professionally and personally, I spent a lot of time with him in those years. We worked with students, we did Shabbatonim, and really got a front seat as he was preparing for the chief rabbinate when Lord Jacobitz was in the process of stepping down.
Amazing. We're so we're so impressed by you, but also we're obsessed with Rabbi Sacks.
Yeah, I share that obsession, and I feel it's a real privilege to be able to promulgate his teachings. I mean, he was so prolific that it would take a lifetime to go through his Torah, and thank God so many things are coming out now that were either not published or coming out in different languages, in French and German and Arabic and Hebrew. And so it's beautiful as you see different populations sort of understand the impact and the influence, and frankly, it also increases the sadness, because there's so many world events where we need his optimism now, we need his hope, we need also a spiritual framework that is deeply particularistic, but also deeply humanistic, to understand the world in which we live. And I think we need other people to step up to that, and to lead by his example. But he was one in a generation, and so as much as I think about his influence, I also think about the immense loss. For me, I would say in many ways he was perhaps the most influential person in my writing career, because I was always a reader and I was always a writer, and I grew up in the home of a writer. But when you see Rabbi Sacks's study, used to have in his what he would call a garage, used to have a shed, right? It was like he repurposed it, and it was his garden shed, and he just had mountains of books, latest sociological studies, psychological studies, studies in philosophy, and he was very well read up to the moment. And he put these lenses, he had certain lenses with which he saw the world. And they were it's almost as if the world was refracted through his Judaism. As he would say, how do I take the values, the psukim, the pieces of Talmud, how do I take the philosophy and sort of bring all that to bear on the current situation that we're in. And in that sense, I think he very much worked with his students to think in that way, and also to understand you have to have a lot of input to have a lot of output. You just got to read a lot in a lot of different disciplines and then keep pushing ideas out. And so I that's really in many ways the gift that he gave to me is maybe it's even the restlessness, the intellectual restlessness, the desire to know more and do more and think more.
Yeah, very well said. And he, I think we really needed him for the post-COVID world, and he warned about the rise of populism and all these things. So, as
Yeah.
just even just as a political commentator, not just as a religious leader, he was very important. So I'm glad we're able to give him,
especially now with what's going on in Israel, and you say to yourself, I mean, there's been, I mean, I don't think democracy is going to die. I don't think that there's going to be a civil war and the country's going to fall apart. I really have more faith in Israel than that. I do think that it requires some spiritual wisdom, and I don't know where that will come from. I don't know.
Very important point. So, the second part of that question was about your methodology. Just if you can briefly tell us, how you approach Tanakh, and we can go from there.
Yeah. Well, you said one word, which is a problem, which is briefly. I think, when you're dealing with a text with this kind of history and this kind of influence, not only in Judaism, but of course in Western civilization, it really asks you to go slow. And I think that's really important. I think that's what the interpretive process is. It's putting speed bumps on words, on letters, on vocalization, right? A cantillation note, right? And when you think about it, we've been around, thank God, as Jews for a long time. So we've had a long time to do this slow work. And I think it is slow work to understand and bring a wealth of sources. I do talk a little bit about it in my preface to Kohelet, just wrote for Magid, been my publisher and really close friends who've really been very supportive and very wise in their guidance. And I tried to explain a little bit of my methodology in Kohelet, and I compared it to Sir Kenneth Clark, and he wrote about, the art critic, he wrote about how you look at a painting and all the different levels of looking at a painting. And I guess I'll share that with you, but I do develop it a little bit more in the book, and certainly you should read Kenneth Clark in the original to get the best understanding. But he talks about sort of the initial intake when you see a painting, which is, he describes it as you're going 30 miles per hour, on a bus passing by. So you just sort of notice what's the size, what's the basic coloration, and then you sort of, slow down, and then you begin to understand the different parts of a composition, how an artist chose to depict what scene, what did he leave out of the frame, she leave out of the frame. And then it's at that point when you're sort of saturated aesthetically with something that you begin to put in some of the intellectual components which sustain your attention. So for example, you'll say, oh, this was painted in Delft, and what was happening politically in Delft at that time, or this or dogs appear in these paintings, and this was true for paintings of this century, and this is what the dogs symbolized, or lapis lazuli was used. You're getting those intellectual pieces. For Clark, the intellectual pieces kept him focused on the painting, as opposed to saying, oh, I'm kind of bored, or I'm just, the sensory appeal has waned for me, I'm moving on to another painting. It's just like, stay there. And he says, and then he takes all of that knowledge, that intellectual knowledge, the compositional knowledge, the sort of initial intake, and then he becomes totally saturated with it. So I would say that's a pretty good description of a method for me, which is looking at the text without mafarshim, looking at it to raise my own questions, looking at the pasuk, then the entire chapter, sometimes multiple chapters. It'll be using a concordance. I'm looking up lots of different places where a particular word appears, and looking at different places for comparison. And then, the real slow work begins, which is, what does this parish say? And what does that parish say? What does this modern scholar say? What novel did I read where a similar concept came up, and how would that help me? That doesn't go into a book necessarily, but that's what goes into the study and the prep.
More, I know, I've read, I'm a big fan of the Magida Studies in Tanakh series in general. And something I've noticed about your works with them, it's funny because you first right now mentioned that you start off kind of reading it in a sense of quiet, meaning you're just reading it and letting it absorb and kind of like reflect and all that. And then you go into the commentaries and everything. And one thing I've noticed is actually in terms of the scope, I don't think another writer has the amount of scopes of commentaries that you bring into every single chapter. It's like you will bring in, it's not just Jewish commentaries, it's not even just scholars, it's like every possible, any possible thing that can be said on that pasuk.
Yeah. That is very kind of you to say, but it's actually not true. And I think one of the things you learn is, you finish something, and then my book on Esther was going to print, and all of a sudden I realized it was a book that that just came to my attention. I was like, literally hold the press. And of course, there's always hold the press because there's always going to be some new thing. And I think that actually, as a writer, it's a very, very hard thing. It's almost excruciating. The feeling that you've sent something off to print, what if you make a mistake? Right? I make plenty of mistakes, and someone didn't catch it. Or there was a big piece of scholarship and someone says, oh, you didn't put that in. So, that inner critic, which is always telling you, what did you not do? And
it's amazing because what you expressed before was actually before you even get into all these commentaries, which I get overwhelmed every chapter. I'm like, whoa. You actually just take a look at it and kind of absorb it, organically before anything. So that's really cool. Okay, so let's get into Kohelet, your new book. Kohelet is a very strange book. I'm not just saying it. The sages themselves have pointed towards this, and it's a very strange book in the biblical canon. One of the difficulties in approaching Kohelet is placing it in a proper genre. Sages and scholars have differed in their opinions regarding the nature and the genre in which Kohelet should be placed. Could you elaborate on the different possible genres Kohelet might fit into and what your ultimate opinion on the matter is?
Yeah, so I'm going to burst the bubble right now. I don't have an ultimate opinion. I have opinions, right? And I think part of that is because, and that here we get, I'm not going to demystify, I'm going to mystify, or problematize. I'll say problematize the text. I think we know what narrative is. We know what legal writing is, and we know, I don't like this term in scholarship, writing, cultic writing, which is writing about Leviticus, writing about things that took place, sacrificial texts about the Mishkan. So Kohelet, really, we're not really prepared. There's nothing really that prepares us for it except for Mishlei. We have another book which contains quotations. I do some contrast with Eov also, with the book of Job, which is different. It's very different than the book of Mishlei, but worth noting here. So you have all of these aphorisms, and they're put together, and you say, well, what's different? But let's just call it Proverbs. Call it Proverbs 2, or call it depressing Proverbs, right? The book of Proverbs everything seems so didactic. If you're wise, this is going to happen. If you're a fool, that's going to happen. If you have a bad neighbor, life's going to be difficult for you. If you have a good neighbor, so you almost, and I've been doing some writing on Mishlei, it's almost predictable. And Kohelet is anything but predictable. So on one hand, you could say it's a book of aphorisms, but actually, in many ways, it's testing aphorisms. So you'll have modern commentaries, and this was very helpful for me, is Kohelet looking at almost in quotations, looking at a common piece of wisdom in the day and saying, is that true? You think that's really true? So it's as if I said, a stitch in time saves 9. Does it really? What does that mean? Does that really work? And I think actually, as a modality of exposition and curiosity, it can't be beat, because you're saying to yourself, why do we accept everything that we hear, or every sort of common wisdom, when those things may or may not be true? The problem is that we don't always understand what's in the quotation marks, what he's trying to test out. So on the one hand, there's you could say it's a book of Proverbs, but it doesn't really fit neatly in the Proverbs department. It has what you might say is like one narrative portion, maybe. It has it has a chapter 2 where he talks about I built this and I built that, and I call it a thought experiment in the book, and I compare it to other thought experiments. Let me see. I wish we could do this test, frankly. I have so much money. Let me just see if it really brings me happiness. And I always wonder when you're reading chapter 2, how many years did it take to make the vineyard, to build the buildings, right? In other words, is this the retrospective of a lifetime? And then these are his conclusions. So I think that, and then there's some poetry, the poetry of the time poem in chapter 3. So it really elides any sort of easy genre. One could say, and sort of, I'm drawn to this. This was a manual for courtiers. When you look carefully, most people recognize the more depressing verses, and that would mean that they haven't truly deeply studied this book. When you deeply study this book, there are a lot of observations about human nature that are not necessarily positive or negative. They're observations, and there are also positive words of wisdom. Here's what you should do. Here's what you should avoid. I think that he's directing a lot of his writing to people with wealth and people with authority. Right, they have some kind of governance. So I think that's yeah. But I'm going to go with it doesn't fit in a genre, and that's okay. It's genreless. Its genre is it's genreless.
It transcends genre.
Transcends or frustrates, depending on who's learning it, I guess.
Fascinating. Bensy, you want to take the next one as well?
Sure. Can you speak to the unique style and structure of Kohelet and how these features inform us about this book?
Yes, that's similar to the genre question in the sense that different chapters have different structures. So, for example, when we start the book, it does not start as a typical biblical book would, which locates the author, maybe the tribe, the geographic location. We don't have any of those details. The name, Ani Kohelet, I don't know who's Kohelet. It's almost as if we assume we know who this person is. And it's almost like you sort of jumped into a conversation midpoint. That's what the book feels like a lot. And so in a way, I imagine that the author had done this at different time periods. This isn't like it doesn't feel like one continuous text. So for example, the 12th chapter, which I spent a lot of time on, the ruined estate or the ruined house, right? The decomposure of the human body, or perhaps the entropy of the world. That's clearly written with a very different mindset. And then almost midpoint through, Kohelet starts talking about the book and what he was trying to do, right? And he tells you he's trying to test out these proverbs and what goads people, right? What sort of provokes and inspires people versus what people don't need. And some of his advice is quite repetitive. It's not a collection of aphorisms. It's sort of him going through life and saying, in chapter 4, I talked a little bit about problems of inheritance. I'm going to go back to that in chapter 6. And then I'm going to do it again in chapter 8. I thought it's a great idea when you can't really solve one of the great mysteries, especially about injustice in the world. Let's go have a sandwich. And I'm going to have that sandwich with my wife. Right? And I can't really solve things, so I'm just going to enjoy myself. And that doesn't happen in one chapter. It doesn't happen in 2 chapters. It happens in repeated chapters. So I think you're getting a sense of him sort of cycling in and out the way that all of us do in a lifetime. We all, we're all asking certain questions at different stages of our lives, and the questions get more sophisticated, and sometimes the answers aren't apparent. And we're just going to live within the struggle. And as Rilke says, we're going to love the questions. You can only love this book if you love the questions, right? And you can say, I can hold contradiction in my hands. Like I can hold it, I can uphold it and understand that I'm not going to tie everything up in a bow. It's very American to tie everything up in a bow. I think Israelis, I don't know the Israelis, they don't have a word for happy ending. You know what the the expression happy ending is in Hebrew? Happy ending.
You're right, there's happy ending.
Yeah, it's not cookie cutter. There's no light at the end of the tunnel when you're reading this.
Right. And that's okay. And
Yeah,
that's okay.
And that's
life.
similar
That's
to Eov
life.
in a way. That's similar to Eov in a way, because Eov is also about, really struggling with the questions, not necessarily getting answers.
Right. The really big difference, I mean, there are many differences in the Sefer, in this farm, and I write about them. The big difference is that Eov had something happen to him. Kohelet makes things happen, right? And so Kohelet has much more agency in outcomes. And one of the things that's very interesting, someone was talking to me recently this week about materialism in the book of Eov, and and whether or not how materialism features when Eov loses everything. I said, yeah, but he gains everything back at the end of his life, as if Ki'ilu, like, I did well and I got all this reward. I think Kohelet would have been maybe even repulsed by that. Like, it's not so simple that you pass the test and then you hit the jackpot, there's 10 lemons, whatever, and you get $1 million. I just don't, I think there's a certain brutal reality, and I'm okay living in a brutal reality. It's not pleasant, it's not comfortable, but it is life.
It is life. Absolutely.
You, in the introduction, you mentioned how, I think, especially in the beginning, if I'm not mistaken, Kohelet uses the word I a lot.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting part. Maybe if I can ask you to elaborate on that part.
Yeah, the eye of Kohelet, I appears more times in the book of Kohelet than any other sefer. So you can see that this is one person, which may mean it's not representative of every person, or because he's writing this in sort of a memoir type of fashion, and not making a claim that my experience means your experience. I'm very conscious of this as a teacher, that you have to always be careful when you speak, because you can only speak from your experience and you can only understand the world from your perspective. And so I think a lot of teachers, because they have authority, they use that authority, that I-ness, to say, I know better, and I know, and let me just make this deposit in your mind and your heart, and then you will be like me. I find that very frightening as an educator and move far away from it. And I think when you look at Kohelet, I think there's something intellectually honest about saying I. Rabbi Sacks has a different view of this. Rabbi Sacks talks about the I, the consumer I, the self-absorbed I, the narcissistic I of Kohelet. It's like it's no wonder that he's not happy. And he mentions this really magnificent letter that the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent to someone. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was asked this question about someone who had fallen on unfortunate circumstances and was very upset, and difficult family and financial circumstances. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe took the letter, circled the word I, in every time it appeared, and then just sent the letter back like that, basically suggesting, if you want to get out of this state of depression, you need to be less self-absorbed, right? In other words, your contact with the other, with community, your care about the other will take away, in some way, minimize the self-absorption. And I think that's that's fair. It's a beautiful lesson. I don't read the I quite as negatively, but I can see why one would.
Yeah. Okay.
Very well. So at its core, Kohelet is all about the search for meaning. This question drives the book from beginning to end. Yet in your introduction, you discuss the uniqueness of Kohelet's search as anthropological as opposed to cosmological. Can you discuss the difference between these two ideas and the way Kohelet chooses to go about this search for meaning?
Yeah, so Kohelet, I think, is not Aristotelian in the sense of asking big questions. I was a philosophy major, and that's always been a field close to my heart. And so he's not saying, what is beauty? What is justice? He's saying, this is the way I have experienced money, right? I've experienced wealth. I've experienced other people. I've experienced problems in government. And he's not making a claim that the world is a certain way. He's making a claim that his life is a certain way. And so I think that's very different. I want to share with you. I would say it was a really maturing experience for myself, particularly as a young teacher. When I was an undergraduate at Yeshiva University, where I proudly teach now, I went to Australia for the summer. I went on a program called Counterpoint. We had a group of Yeshiva University students who went in our summer, went to Australia and New Zealand, and Australians winter. And we worked with students. And we ran Shabbatonim. We became very close with students. It was very far away. It took 4 different legs of the flight to get there at that time. It was in the 80s. And a few days after we left, there was a car accident, and 2 students were killed. 2 of the students we worked with were killed. And one of the students I was particularly close with wrote me a letter. And it was, how could God do this? How did this happen to me? Like, they were so good. They were so young. They had their whole lives ahead of them. You imagine exactly the kind of conversation. I don't know how long the letter took to get to me. And being the philosophy major that I was, I photocopied articles about why bad things happen to good people, right? It was I sort of said, let me bring to bear the things that I know and the things that I've learned. And I sent this package. It probably cost me $25 in stamps, and I never heard from her again. And she was right not to write to me. Later on, I was doing a master's in the Institute of Education in London as part of University of London, and I came across an article where it basically warns educators to make sure they make a distinction between that which is philosophical and that which is psychological. She was asking me a psychological question, but the language that she understood to ask it was philosophical. So instead of saying, I am hurting and I want to know how to manage my hurt, what can you do for me? What can you tell me? She said, how do I believe in God? But she didn't really want to, she wasn't asking a question of belief. And it was my fault that I didn't understand it for what it was. And I say that as a long way of answering. I think the Kohelet is one person's interpretation of a very unique world. I mean, who has that kind of money, right? I mean, I know that people do, but it was, who has that kind of money? Who has that kind of power? Who has that level of sagacity to like really understand a world and to give you his world? See, the zchut, the privilege that we have, that someone sort of took notes, if you will, on the world as he experienced them. And that's what I mean by anthropological as opposed to cosmological. I think, Michelet is trying to tell you, do this and don't do that, right? It's trying to give you its own way of ordering the world. Kohelet's not ordering the world. In fact, if anything, you put a podcast for the perplexed, so Kohelet really could be your mascot. I think if you're honest and you read it, you just say, I finished this book and I understand it less than when I wrote this big book on it. I understand it less than I did before. How is that?
Right. Yeah, it's very unique in the way what you just said about his unique perspective. It kind of reminds me of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Yeah.
He's like the leader of the world, but at the same time, he's giving us the notes to his life, like his diary. Yeah. And it is kind of Michelet overlap, but there's that same perspective where you're like, you're getting something from someone who has it all. It's a unique perspective. So thank you for clarifying that. And there's also something very unique that comes.
Wait, I want to say one other thing, and if that's okay with you. Kohelet does not minimize the importance of money. He does not. He doesn't say, "Oh, none of this was worth it." It was all. He says, I enjoyed my wealth, and that's what I got out of my wealth. He's basically saying you can get enjoyment, you can get pleasure out of it. Just don't expect it to give you anything more than that. And I think that's very, very sobering, especially right now. We live in an extremely material culture. We live as Jews, as Orthodox Jews. I mean, the affluence in our community is off the charts. And we have to understand what the limits are of this, not the limits of what we can achieve, but what did you think it was going to buy you? Because open up Kohelet. Kohelet's going to tell you what it's going to buy you. It's going to buy you a nice time. That's all it's going to buy. It's going to buy you a better cut of steak. Vizehu zeh. It's not going to buy you happiness. It's not going to buy you peace in your family. It's not going to buy you better leaders. In fact, it may come worse leaders will come out of it. So I think there's a sobering of it.
Absolutely. And what you just said is so appropriate, because we actually just interviewed Rabbi Jeremy Weider on, affluenza, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's an important.
I think Rabbi Weider is, he's such a unique and powerful voice on this. I think we haven't really come to terms with the impact, and I'm very grateful to him and for he's a colleague of mine in Yeshiva University. It takes bravery to do that.
For sure. Definitely. So I want to go back to something that's interesting, because there's a lot of misconceptions about Kohelet also that I'm thinking about. One of them is the fact that it's always affiliated with people usually connect it to like sadness, but the word simcha appears more times in Kohelet than all of the 5 books of Moses combined. And there are some calls to action that are positive, like rejoice, after some negative comments. So what's your take on this? What's the mood of the book?
Yeah, I'm all for rejoicing. Don't get me wrong. I think that's I think the mood of the book probably resembles the mood that people, resembles the moods that we're in, even in the course of a day. We sort of have the full range of emotions. And I think that's one of the nice things about the book, is that it provides the range. I always say this in painting, because we talked about Kenneth Clark, to paint something of full value is to paint the lightest to the darkest shade. And that's what gives paintings their depth. So if you imagine what gives writing its depth or a class, right? You go, oh, I laughed, I cried, I had a range of experiences. And I think the book, be prepared for that. And also look for the book's light moments. Look for the advice that has nothing to do with despair. We're going to talk a little bit about Hevel and maybe sort of reinterpreting it so that you don't open the book and say, all is vanity. Because if that were the case, just close the book now. Like, we're done here. Nothing's worthwhile. Right. So what could I possibly write that would be worthwhile? I imagine the author saying, and I think that's not the case. One thing that I think, I'm not gonna say this is my unique discovery, and if I could write more about it, I certainly would. When you see the statements of Simcha are very often right after something quite heavy. So pay attention to context. We tend to decontextualize things, right? We tend to take verses out of the context, and then we have only a fractional reading of them, because if you took a sentence out of this podcast, but it was meant to be with a string of other adjectives, verbs, nouns, it would be distorted. And so I think there's a distortion of the simcha there and the despair. So if you come off of despair and you go straight into simcha, then what I think is happening is what I'll call a theology of distraction. In other words, you cannot resolve things, but what you can do is distract people, and then they will come back to themselves. And maybe I just want to make sure. Wait, hold on. Can you hear the dog?
No, I don't hear anything.
You can't. Okay, I'm sorry. I was just so distracted by the dog, and I'm talking about distraction. So I'm gonna just take a step back. So what's a theology of distraction? The best comparison I can make is to some of the work that John Gottman has done in relationships. So there are irreconcilable differences in couples, and that's probably true in friendships. That's true with bosses and employees. Irreconcilable differences. And what you can do is you can say, we're going to have the same argument, and we're going to have it again, and we're going to have it again, and we're going to have it again, and we're not going to make any progress on it. And the fact is, one of the things that Gottman says is having better listening capacity is not necessarily changing anything. It means you're communicating better about your irreconcilable differences, but you're not actually resolving them. He says, instead, take a pause, right? Do something that you enjoy, which will remind you why you're in this relationship in the first place. So that if we can take that lens, the Gottman lens, and we can put it on Kohelet, which I know is, it's very different circumstances and different kinds of writing, but the idea that you can be in this deep despair and then say, I'm not going to resolve this. So the best thing that I can do so that I can still embrace life is to do something that I deeply enjoy. I deeply enjoy having a very festive meal with friends. Now, you say to yourself, that didn't make the injustice go away, not for 1 second. But what it enabled me to do is it enabled me to say, I love life. And that's where I think people don't understand Kohelet. I see Kohelet as a person who loves life. And so he's reflecting on these things. But ultimately, he says, I'm going to do what I can do in this world. You know what? I have money. Baruch Hashem, I have money. I can make a vineyard. I can have a great meal. I can do these things. And I must do these things because I have to show. I mean, otherwise, why would you canonize this book? You have to be able to show that Kohelet really deeply loved his life.
Mm-hmm.
So the simcha coming after after moments of despair is the simcha in spite of it. That's what you're saying.
It's not in spite of it. I'm going to say as a response to it. And maybe I haven't articulated it sort of enough, but to me, the fact that he keeps repeating this, it's almost because we don't get it, right? We keep thinking, I'm going to go back to the same problem. You're not going to solve this problem. You're not going to solve why good people suffer. There's not any, I mean, if you do, that's amazing. And then you really will have demystified not only Judaism, but every other thing in life. And so you say to yourself, oh, am I going to be Jean-Paul Sartre and say, like, should I kill myself? Should I have a cup of coffee? Which apparently he never said that, but that's always, cited in his name. So you're going to be an existentialist philosopher and you're going to say, I shouldn't kill myself, but I shouldn't live either. That's not Kohelet. I think that there are existential questions he's asking about his place in the universe. But I think at the end of the day, he's asking what has enduring worth. And when you can't figure out what has enduring worth, what actually gives you pleasure in the moment? And do that, because we're not here for a long time. And God gave those things to us in the simcha, all those simcha. It's always because God gave us permission to do those things. So when people think he's a hedonist, it's like, you don't know anything about hedonism. That is not accurate, right? Hedonists don't think this is what God gave me permission to do. Hedonists think this is what I want to do, and I don't care what God says, right? So I think that there's subtleties here that are important to bear in mind.
Why do you think that, aside from the very end, God's name, or God, but even more so, God as a response to these problems that he's, elaborating throughout the entire book, why is that not used?
Well, God does appear in the book. The way that God appears, though, is not in the Eov sense of I am in dialogue with God about these things. I think that's probably the disarming thing, right? It's that he'll mention God gave for me permission, or God does this. It's almost remote. It's observations about the way God operates, as opposed to the personal God. God, help me out here, right? It's not the David HaMelech, crying and waiting for God's salvation or thanking God. It's not like that. And in that sense, one might say it's not spiritual in the way that other books are.
What I meant. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not. It does not have that. It does not have that. And so if you're looking for that, that's complicated. What we do with Esther, and God's name doesn't appear, is so many Mefarshim say, God appears everywhere. God's name doesn't appear everywhere. And here you see God's name does appear in a lot of places in Kohelet, but not as the personal God.
Fascinating.
Yeah. All right. And regarding authorship, can you give us a consensus of the scholarly position regarding the authorship of Kohelet and where you sort of land in the matter? And whether
No, I think that's a hard question. I totally appreciate the rabbinic notion that Shlomo HaMelech wrote this book. I mean, everything leads to Shlomo in many ways, right? I mean, Kohelet, right? I'm a king and king of Yerushalayim. I think there's something very intriguing about the idea that someone would write different types of things at different stages in life, right? So you write Shir Hashirim with ardor of youth, and you write Mishlei with the sort of settling in of middle age and wisdom, and then there's this sort of the decrepitude, comes in, and then you're more morose. I think that's in some ways it oversimplifies what each of these Sfarim really is, right? It really does accomplish. But I certainly appreciate it. I think we have hints at it. I think it was probably written by someone in a court. We don't have, we outside of that rabbinic statement, we really don't have conclusive textual proof about it. Certainly modern scholars don't think that Shlomo wrote it. I just use the term Kohelet to honor who Kohelet was. If Kohelet was Shlomo or if Kohelet was someone else, it matters less to me. I understand why it is. I don't think I'm undercutting the significance of the book by being unsure of who wrote it. I think I actually want to say in general, I think a lot of people spend too much time thinking about authorship and not enough time thinking about content.
Yeah.
And sometimes when they can't figure out who the author is, they sort of dismiss the book, right? Certainly that's been my limited experience with sometimes in the academic community, where you write something off. Oh, it's multiple authors. What significance? All right, can we get beyond that and talk about what this book is actually about? So that's not the answer that you wanted. I'm not going to demystify that for you.
That is the answer that we wanted, because that, unfortunately, people, the average Orthodox Jew is not studying Kohelet. And maybe they're reading it once a year or whatever it is, but to actually delve into it, it's something that we want to really champion, is a return to fundamentals and to actually start appreciating these wisdom texts.
Yeah.
Because whoever wrote it doesn't make a difference. These are,
Right.
it's canon, and it was canon for a reason. So,
Right.
and Chazal held it to a
Right.
very high regard. So who cares, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say who cares. I wouldn't go ad kadei kach, and that's why I do deal with this. I think it's important to, and footnotes for the people who want to delve into the scholarship. There are a lot of books in the reference section at the end for people who want to do more work, because I think there's more work to be done. So it's not really a question of not caring. It's when you get to a ceiling where you say, we're not going to know the answer to this. So it's not like dealing with the 5 books or the Chamishe Chumshei Torah. We're not asking the same questions about divine revelation. Now we're really asking historically, who's most likely, and part of that is we look at loan words, we look at words that don't seem to fit, and what general period they're from. So that's the sort of the detective work of biblical study. It's not an area of my expertise, although I wish it were. But I try not to get stumped by the author questions.
Well said. So Hevel, the word Hevel, is probably the most important word in the book of Kohelet. The meaning of this word is difficult to translate. It also seems to change in context as the book goes on. What does this word mean? How does its usage change as the book goes on? And why is this word so central to the entire book?
Yeah. I mean, thank you for asking that question. I guess if you said what 3 letters sum up the book, it would be those. Not even a pasuk, but a word. And I think that's very rare in biblical terms to say you actually could encapsulate this book in one word, and this is the word. And I'll tell you why I think you can encapsulate it. So, of course, there was the King James 1611 translation of Hevel as vanity. The minute you say vanity, it becomes pejorative, right? You think, oh, you're so vain, right? They even have a song about it, right? So, vanity, the opposite of humility, the sense of purposelessness, futility. And there have been a lot of translations. Michael V. Fox's book on Kohelet was magnificent, and actually 2 books, because he did the JPS commentary and he did a separate book. He talks about absurdity, right? And so you could go Kafkaesque on this, right? You can go King James on this, you can go Kafkaesque on this. So I'm going to go Alter on this. Robert Alter translated in his translation, and he completed some years ago the translation of all the biblical books. He brings support for Hevel as breath. And I think that's just a magnificent translation because, first of all, it's neutral. It's morally neutral. It's not saying this is a waste of time. You open it up, this is a waste of time. He's basically, in observing life, Kohelet is saying things are like breath. They have transitory value. In other words, it's here and it's gone, just the way that we breathe. But breathing is also involuntary. And if you stop breathing, you have no life. So there's something that's necessary about Hevel, about the breath. All is breath. Certainly, if you're meditators, you know the importance of breathing. I think about this every morning when I say Kol HaNeshama Tahalel. I always take a deep breath in and release, and do the same thing for the second pasuk. Even the repetition, it's sort of getting you into that meditative space of inhale and exhale. So in that space, I think Kohelet's question isn't necessarily the search for meaning, which was the subtitle of my book or the title of my book. It's really, is there any enduring worth in the world? I think that's his question. So he says, actually, I'm not sure there's anything enduring. Even big buildings that I built, even deep-rooted vineyards and trees that I planted, sometime in the future, those things will fall apart. I don't know if you've ever been to the Colosseum, right? My trip to the Colosseum was terrible. But you see the ruins of a civilization. I just want to share this observation with you because it really speaks to the Hevel experience. So if you're a student of Jewish history, you go to the Colosseum, Talmud, the Jews who were gladiators, how oppressed we were by Edom, by Rome. And the whole thing, I was so overwhelmed by it. I sort of left my children for a few minutes. I just stood in the ruins, and I was so disgusted to be there. And then a gladiator saved it for me. That there's these gladiators, they dress up like gladiators, they wear the outfit, and you could give them €1 and they take a picture. So as we're walking by, as my husband wear a kippot, and a gladiator said, Manishma, right? He's in Hebrew, he said how's it going? Right? So all of a sudden I was like, thank you so much. Because all of this is Hevel. All of this, you thought that you were building an empire that would last forever, and it fell apart. But here, Hebrew has been revitalized, right, in our day, right? People speaking an ancient language. So we don't have the ruins. We have the words, and the words are revived. And it's just, it's so remarkable to me. So I think when you're in Kohelet, if you translate Hevel as what has transitory value versus enduring value, and then what he's saying is actually, because there's nothing that you can create in life that will have enduring value, right? Sof davar kol nishma, it was do mitzvot, do things of purpose. And he says, and also be in the transitory moment, value the transitory, because it's going to go away, and you're going to stop breathing one day. And so that meal that you could have had with friends, that call that you could have made, that flower that you could have smelled, you let it go because you're so busy worrying about your mortality. Just worry about your pleasure. Worry about your delight. Don't worry. Think about think about God's world that he gave you. Make a blessing. It's I that's what I'm saying. I find the book so inspiring, but you can, if you read that one word one way, it's going to be a totally different read of the book. Yeah,
you can read it as very negative or very stoic. It's very, I think it's very stoic for sure.
Yeah.
That message especially that you just said, it's just be in the moment. Don't just let life pass you. Or God gave us the world to appreciate as well, not just not just the spiritual, but also the physical.
Right. I mean, I'm going to go back to painting. There's painters who painted the memento mori, like the reminder that you will die. There's sometimes a skull. There's like a set of pearls. There's a clock. But when you look at paintings of fruit and paintings of flowers, and sometimes you'll see, if you look closely, oh, this is so beautiful. You'll see a fly. You'll see spots on the petals. They're browning. In other words, the artist is saying to you, why is the artist painting this? Because flowers used to cost so much money. And so, like, could you just paint them and just hold on to them? In a painting, you could freeze frame the flowers. But then the artist tells you can't actually do that, because the flowers, the minute you cut them, they're already dying. And that's okay. I mean, I talk about a conversation between Freud, the older Freud, and the young poet Rilke, who's like so disgusted. They're going on a walk in the summer, and Rilke's thinking, like, all this beauty, it's all going to die. And Freud doesn't have a problem with it. He says there's transitory value. Why would you be disgusted? The opposite. Lean into the beauty of it. And so, I think that's what Kohelet has taught me ultimately, to lean into the beauty of it.
Amazing. Beautiful.
Dr. Brown, why do you think that today, at least, I could be wrong with what I'm about to say, but I don't know, I get the feeling that today people are not as introspective, they're not as reflective. Just like people don't, they're not, maybe not searching for meaning like our grandfathers did. I feel like today the world is just kind of like fast paced, cutthroat, and we don't have people who are reflecting on things the way you see Kohelet, like, takes a step back and looks at the world and says, like, what's going on here? You know what I mean? And today I feel like it's missing in the world in general.
Right. So I'm not down on the world in quite that way. Please call me Erica, not Dr. Brown, unless you're
off that ledge. That's what I'm telling.
Yeah. So I think part of this has to do with the selfie culture. And Rabbi Sacks was very, very conscious of the sort of I versus the we, the iPod, the iPhone, and I find, I was just watching someone take a photo of herself in her situation, right, where she was standing next to nature, and priming herself, making sure that she looks good. Who knows where that selfie is going? And I thought to myself, put your phone down and look at the world, and you are not the center of it, and the world is much bigger. And it is, we have taught people that they are the center of a universe, and all lenses shine on me. And then, of course, we don't understand why people have so much anxiety, because the hyper focus on the self makes you actually sort of inured to the importance of what other people are going through, right? It cuts off the empathy, it cuts off the connection. So I think to myself, and I don't want to be one of those old fogies who says, "Oh, turn down the cell phone," I give it. Although if you took my cell phone away, it would only be a vacation for me. And I do spend, thank God, many hours of a day disconnected from my phone so that I can have a creative life. I worry about it, about how we reverse some of the trends of technology that have made us not reflective, because we're not thinking about our place in the universe as the universe is wonderful and we have to earn it. We're thinking ourselves like, I am amazing and the world is terrible. That's a very, very hard way. It's a very hard way to live. I think for me, that's generational. I grew up not thinking a lot about myself, not getting compliments every day from teachers and parents. It just wasn't the way that we were raised. We were raised to earn the world, earn a right to contribute to the world. And I worry, and that's part of the affluence, issue as well. I will say that a lot of what you're talking about, I call them the acquisition years. And I'd love to write more about it. I think there's a time in one's life when we're just sort of, David Brooks calls it the first mountain. I'll call it the acquisition years, where, you think the mountain is your education, your car, the neighborhood you live in, the number of kids you have, the clothes that they wear. And you're going, and you know, for those who are fortunate, they go up that mountain, they get to the top and they go, is that all? I'm 35 years old. Is that all? You know, and then of course things start to unravel. Someone in your family gets sick, you lose a parent, there's a divorce, there's a move, whatever it is, a loss of job. And all of a sudden you come tumbling down. And that's like David Brooks says, you know, then it's time for the second mountain. What's the mountain you're going to climb? And mountains are very important in biblical tradition too. So I think a lot about that, about the mountains that we scale. That's when I see people asking those reflective questions, because all the world was supposed to look a certain way. I was supposed to get married at this age. I was supposed to be able to have children. I was supposed to live forever, and my parents were supposed to live forever. So then, you know, illness and life it changes. Here's what's unfortunate. We lack language to handle some of these situations because we're not as reflective as we need to be, because the acquisition gives us one language, and that's the language of the consumer. That's the language of the consumer. I mean, when I grew up, there was one movie in the movie theater and they played it for months, and you saw it a few times. Right? I don't know how many times I saw E.T. I don't know. It's probably a world's record. Who knows? Like, that was what was playing. You went out. That's what you did. We're not there. People, it takes so much mental effort and emotional effort just to stay still today. The saturation of knowledge. I don't know how we filter all that. I don't know how we filter all of it. But I think we need to introduce reflective language, and we need to do that in school. I think children are natural philosophers, and we have a lot of research on it. I think they're already asking questions about meaning and about death, and about God. And we only service and grow that when we can commend those questions and sit and ask them. We don't have to have pat answers. We could just sit in the wandering posture with them.
Maybe that's what Chazal meant, that prophecy will be among the children at the time.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Or the children return the hearts of the fathers, right? Like Lehev Shiv Levavot. I think there is something to that. And I do feel very optimistic. I think there's backlash to all the consumers. And I feel that it's coming. It's not here yet, but I feel it's going to come.
It's definitely going to come. And we share your optimism. And we really we're so thankful and grateful that you were able to make the time for us.
Oh, this has been such a great hour. It's just very, it's very holy to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we hope to do this again to discuss other books of yours.
Well, I'm a little tired right now. Kohelet took a lot out of me, so.
Take a break. Much deserved break. All right.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you so much for coming on. For all our viewers, Dr. Erica Brown has multitudes of books that everyone should check out. Magid Publishing. You write for Magid Publishing, and what other publishing houses?
I wrote for Simon & Schuster and Jewish Lights, and did one book with Berman House. So yeah, and I feel very, very fortunate to have wonderful publishers, and my friends at Magid are a treasure.
Amazing. And everyone should take a look. The books are incredible, and Dr. Brown, you're incredible. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Hope to.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. Anytime. Anytime. Best conversation I've had all week.
Oh, really? Thank you. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Good night.